Hello and welcome back to the FPL tips video ahead of game week 28 by Fantasy Football Scout. My name's Rich and as always I'm back with 4 tips ahead of the upcoming game week. So I've stayed up a little late tonight. I'm recording this Thursday night. It's about midnight. Those of you who watch Scoutcast might realise my voice might sound a little bit different as I've been quite ill, and like I say, I'm recording quite late at night as well. The reason for recording so late is I wanted to see what happened in the Arsenal game. Originally I was going to record it during the Arsenal game, and then I realised how important it would be with a quick turnaround to have that information for when this video comes out on Friday morning, because Friday is also the deadline as well. So what I'm going to go through on this episode is we're going to have a really quick look at the suspension tightrope, because we had a yellow card that's going to have some impacts on people on all different strategies in the coming 2 game weeks. And then we're going to look at some free hit 28 ideas. That's going to be using data from the Fantasy Football Scout members area using the Rate My Team tool. So we're going to look at the best players according to that tool, and we're going to put together a little free hit team for 28 for those who are on that strategy. And we're going to discuss what to do with Haaland as well. Obviously, I think a lot of people were looking to sell him. We discussed on the Scoutcast what players we were looking at buying, but he's scored 5 goals since then. So I think it's well worth revisiting on the morning of the deadline. And then we're going to look at the game week 28 captaincy as well, which appears to be wide open. And even more so after Arsenal went to extra time and penalties tonight. So as I say, Friday deadline. So as you're watching this video, the deadline is today at 6:30 p.m. So I'm going to keep it short. I'm going to keep it concise. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's get into the first bit. So as mentioned, we're going to revisit the suspension tightrope. Now we're going to look at this really briefly. Now this is a free tool on the Fantasy Football Scout website. It's basically at the bottom right of the screen, and any player who gets to 10 yellow cards now is going to have a 2-game suspension. So with blanks and particularly with doubles, it's going to be key. Now this list, I mean, really it only affects Tony. Tony was booked very, very late in the Southampton game on, what was it, on Wednesday night. So if he gets 1 more yellow card, he's going to miss 2 games. So the reason that's crucial is, of course, he's going to play this week. He's got a fantastic fixture, maybe a captain option against Leicester. However, if he gets booked in that, he's going to miss the entirety of the double. That's even before we consider any, gambling regulation bans that could be forthcoming in the next few weeks or months. So it's well worth keeping an eye on that. And I actually think it's such big information that if you can roll a transfer this week, I honestly would consider it, especially if you're looking at bench boost in 29. And even if you carry him through, if he gets booked in the first game of the double, he survives not getting a yellow in 28 against Leicester, he could get booked in the first game, and a bit like Mitrovic, he will miss the second game in the double. But worse still, he would then miss the second game in the double, and then he would miss game week 30 as well. So, I mean, Tony, it's well worth trying to keep a transfer if you can, and definitely bearing that in mind. If you don't own Tony, despite the incredible fixture, I mean, I think most people do, but I wouldn't be bringing him in this week, for example. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to look at some free hit 28 teams using the Rate My Team tool. First of all, it's worth just looking at the fixtures this week that we've got this week, because as mentioned, it's a blank game week, so there's some big teams missing. So we start off, the reason there's a Friday deadline, Nottingham Forest, who are pretty good at home, play Newcastle, who still have very impressive data defensively as well. So I think a lot of people are going to be looking at Newcastle defenders, if they don't have them already. And it's always fun to have a few players from the Friday night games. Then we've got Villa. They're at home to Bournemouth. Fantastic fixture. That's obviously why people are looking at Watkins this week. They're going to be key, I think, on free hit teams, for example. Brentford at home to Leicester. Leicester awful defensively. So I think, again, it's a good fixture for Brentford. Southampton at home to Spurs. I think people are going to be looking at Spurs assets, but we'll get onto that when we look at captain options. Wolves, they're at home to Leeds. Chelsea, they're at home to Everton. So again, a good fixture for a team who we think are improving, but we've seen a few false dawns from Chelsea this season already. And then Arsenal, who've obviously just played 120 minutes tonight. They don't play until Sunday against Crystal Palace. They're at home, you know, both teams are nearby anyway. So even if it was an away game at Palace, they wouldn't have much travel. So just worth bearing that in mind. Arsenal have got that extra day after the 120 minutes. Key players to note who played 120 minutes. Ramsdale, I mean, he's a keeper. Wouldn't worry about that. Zinchenko, Martinelli and Gabriel. And there's some rumours, and I think that's why it might be worth watching the press conference video later on the Scout channel to see, you know, what's happened. Saliba, he's picked up a knock. What's gonna happen with him? I must admit, I haven't watched the press conference after the Europa League game. That's normally when key information comes out, and there were some reports that Zinchenko was holding his hamstring. Martinelli obviously playing 120 minutes isn't ideal. I think for those not free hitting, just to go off on a very, very small tangent, I wouldn't be doing big -4s and -8s to remove these players that we're not, you know, certain they're going to be out. I think it's okay to roll with one less player because there's going to be some teams in bad shape. I mean, if you've got Saliba, that might be a bit more of an argument to do it, but just don't forget, after this game week there's then the international break where teams are going to be flying all over the world. But what we look at first of all, so the defensive players using the Rate My Team tool. So we've got Kepa top, so Chelsea have that brilliant fixture at home to Everton, and then Ramsdale. We're going to see a lot of Arsenal and Chelsea players in this, and then it's Martinez, Pope, Zaha. If you're free hitting, I think Kepa, he's a no-brainer. I wouldn't waste the Arsenal spot on Ramsdale, despite what I've said. I think I definitely would go to Kepa. So I agree with Rate My Team here. And then defenders, it won't be any surprise that Trippier's top by quite a way, actually. When we get to the actual team it puts together, he's projected to get the second most points this week. So it's a vice-captain option, possibly a captain option. Then we've got Chilwell, quite a bit behind, so 5.33 for Trips, then Chilwell at 4.73. Then you've got Gabriel. Gabriel obviously scored the other day. He had some chances in the Europa League game tonight as well. So such an attacking asset, the best Arsenal defender. I don't think the 120 minutes puts me off, especially if Saliba's out. I don't think Arsenal are going to be able to afford to rotate that backline anymore. And then we have Reece James. Moving on to the more attacking players, we have, again, it's flooded with Arsenal. We've got Saka, we've got Odegaard. It's worth noting Saka and Odegaard didn't start the game. Saka came on, I think he got about 60 odd minutes. Odegaard got much less. He didn't come on till well into extra time. So he'd be fresh. He could be a captain option, Odegaard, actually. And then Son, I think on a free hit, I think Son's a bit of a no-brainer, just because I love getting those players in. They're obviously projected high points, but non-free hit teams are going to struggle to navigate the doubles and blanks and bring someone like Son in. So great asset. Martinelli's next. I think the 120 minutes would put me off bringing him in on a free hit team. Then we've got players like Buendia, Trossard, Bailey, Maddison, and Ward-Prowse as well. And then striker wise, we're looking at Kane, Tony, Watkins. They seem to be very template 3-3, whether you're on free hit or whether you're just playing through with your normal team. You could look at players like Isak. I'm not sure about that myself. You know, Wilson still exists, and we don't know which one would be on penalties if they're on the same team, as we talked about, you know, on the Scoutcast on Monday. Yao Felix, again, I'd rather look at the defenders. We've got Chilwell, we've got James, we've got Kepa. I wouldn't waste a striker spot on him. And Havertz, I think he's popular with people doing transfers because they've got a double, but personally, I wouldn't be bothering with him on a free hit. I think I'd be very boring on the free hit and go for this template Kane, Tony and Watkins combination. So what I've then done is I've gone to FPL.team, an essential planning tool. So thank you to Peter who puts that together. And here's the free hit team that he recommends. Obviously, it's not necessarily the top 11 or 15 players because you can only have 3 players from each team. So it actually would recommend going for this little 4-3-3 team. So Kepa in goal, Gabriel, Chilwell, James and Trippier, vice captain for Trippier. Then we've got Son, Odegaard, Saka, Kane captain, Tony and Watkins. And then the bench, Pope, Buendia, Bailey, Botman. It does say about Cher. There's some news that Cher wasn't in the international team, so potentially is injured. I've also seen things saying that Cher's trained, so keep an eye on that. I mean, that's going to be your bench option. But yeah, so that's the free hit team based on the Rate My Team tool. Looking around at other teams I've seen, it's not far off. What people are looking at. It does seem like there's a bit of a template forming. The places to decide over really, I suppose, now would be maybe you could look at just 2 Arsenal assets. If you wanted to punt a bit, you could look at tweaking the defenders a bit. You could start 2 Newcastle instead of 2 Chelsea, for example. But Chelsea do have the better fixture, I'd say, at home to Everton. Like we've said before, Forest are pretty decent at home. They seem to find a way. But I wouldn't want to go in with no Newcastle. I think Trippier is essential there. Now, we touched upon this part on Scoutcast, so what to do with Haaland, but obviously that was before he scored 5 goals in the Champions League. The short answer here is I don't think it actually changes much. We've got the graphic on screen that Seb put together. I think the key thing here is that we just see the volume of fixtures for Haaland alternatives is just great. I mean, you look at Haaland, he's got a blank, then he's got Liverpool at home. Whereas the meantime, you've got players like Watkins, a player that I've already bought in, and I think a lot of people have bought in, and for a reason. Is Watkins has got those 3 games. He's at home to Bournemouth, then he's got the double away to Chelsea and away to Leicester. And we've seen the power of a double game week just with those Brentford and Brighton players. Like, they picked up incredible scores. I mean, most Brentford and Brighton players returned. It didn't matter what position, did it? It didn't matter if they were goalkeeper, defender, midfield, or even forwards. And even myself, I mean, I had James Ward-Prowse in my team. He only got 5 points. But to be honest, in a normal game week, and this is why I'm using him as an example, 5 points is actually pretty decent. It's like a defender getting a clean sheet and getting booked. So I do think that the accumulation of points you will get, for someone like Watkins, you will get 6 points just for him playing. Alternatively, you'll just get 2 for Haaland playing. So I do think if you've got no value tied up, I think it's easy to come off and then go back. If you've got value tied up, I think it becomes a little bit more tricky, but money's not really a problem. So for me, I would, unless you've got some clever way that you can bench him in 29. Maybe he's a part of your bench boost and you don't have, I don't know, Kane, for example. Maybe that's a scenario. I would keep Haaland if I didn't have Kane. And I had Haaland and I could get 10 or 11 out this week. Maybe there's an argument there to go for it. But yeah, I don't want to dwell on this too much because I think I'm pretty set in my head that selling Haaland's a good idea, even though he just scored 5 points. And I know people worry about effective ownership a lot. And obviously we saw when he had 170, 180, he may have even hit 190% EO. It's not going to be the case. I don't think engaged managers are going to be captain Haaland home to Liverpool in a double game week in 29. So I feel like at most his ownership's going to be 100, 110. And I think a lot of engaged managers won't have him. So I wouldn't bring that into my thinking. I just think the volume of fixtures we've got, even for players like Brennan Johnson, if he's fit. We talked about Havertz as well. I know Seb's very high on Havertz. And what I liked about what Seb put together here is he's put who's on penalties and who's not. As we've already touched on, Isaac and Wilson, he's got them both as yes, because we don't know who's going to take the penalty when they're both on the pitch. Just on Newcastle, it's a decent enough run of fixtures for a good team, but I'm just a huge fan of their defenders. But that is a massive tangent. So in short, I would keep Haaland. If you've got a clever way to keep him, I won't knock it, but I would sell. And finally, we're going to look at captaincy. Again, this is the Rate My Team tool. So Kane is top. So this is for all positions as well. So that's key. Kane is top, 5.74. Trippier down in second, 5.33. Saka's in third at 5.13. And then we got Odegaard, Son, Martinelli, Tony, Chelsea defenders. Gabriel is a shout as well. Before I watched the Arsenal game, I was pretty set, like 99.9% locked on Saka. I still think that's going to be the way I'm going to go. I just think you've got Arsenal playing at home, a much, much better team, on the eye and statistically than Tottenham. I just fancy Arsenal to still manage to win with that. They've got that extra day's rest. I know Spurs have had ages off, but they don't score a lot of goals themselves. I mean, if we move away from the Rate My Team tool, Palace and Saints, they're actually very, very similar for data for expected goals conceded. So Palace are 67.3 minutes per XGC, and over the season, they've conceded 38.39 XG. If you look at Saints, it's only slightly worse. It's slightly better actually. It's 70.4 minutes per XGC instead of the 67 that Palace have, and they've conceded about 36 XG over the season compared to Palace's 38. It's worth mentioning as well, like, I know Liverpool haven't been good, but Southampton are close to Liverpool in the table. They're both pretty mid-table teams for goals conceded, so I know Southampton are right down there, but it's just worth bearing in mind, you know, Southampton are slightly better than Palace, but I think it's so close that it's negligible. That's where I think the fixture comes in. You've got Arsenal, the better team at home, but I do need to have a think about it, because something about, when I looked at this, I thought about Trippier. And we talked about him as a captain option a few months ago when Newcastle were doing the points, inverted commas. And I mean, you think he could be tempting. But as things stand, Thursday at gone midnight, I'm still on Saka captain, and I'll assess it tomorrow. So thanks a lot for joining me this week. Obviously, like I said, Friday deadline, 6:30 in the UK. So please don't forget to set your teams. We've got the international break coming, so we've got a long gap before we've got a huge double game week. So I think if you're free hitting, good luck to you. I do think there's some really good combinations. If you've got wildcard and free hit, there's some pretty good combinations to wildcard. Then you get to save your free hit for later in the season, and you can probably navigate 28 and 29 quite well. Obviously, you'll have different teams depending on if you need to use a bench boost or not. But yeah, most importantly, don't forget your team. I think don't panic, and if you can, roll a transfer and try and go with 2 transfers into the double game week following an international break. But don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks a lot for joining me today.